Thanks a lot, Deputy President. And well, here we are again in this place where we have the coalition who absolutely hate the car industry, who are hell-bent on destroying good jobs. And we have to remind the Senate and the senators in this place about the car industry that used to exist in Australia. And we have senators who make contributions on this point where they keep forgetting the very fact that when Joe Hockey was Treasurer, the former Treasurer of this country, rejoiced in the fact that Ford, Holden, Toyota shut up shop in this country, and we saw close to 200,000 jobs connected to the car industry go out the door and offshore. Well, I'll tell you what it has to do, Senator Chandler, through you, Deputy President, and I don't normally take interjections from you, but it was a good one. But the point here is that if we had a car industry in Australia today, cars today would be much cheaper than they would have been, that they are currently. But we have to import these cars because those opposite decided as a matter of policy that the government was no longer going to support a local car industry. And I think, if my memory serves me correct, Australia is probably the only country in the OECD that does not have some form of a car industry. Every other country does. And it's actually quite embarrassing that we do not have that ability in this country to make things here, particularly cars. And it wasn't just about the motor vehicles that were made here, it was also all the other indirect jobs as a result of making motor vehicles. We had a bunch of engineering jobs that were connected through our TAFEs and universities. There were a number of boilermakers. I know this because my dad used to be a boilermaker. He worked for Ford for many years. My granddad, when he first came to Australia, worked for General Motors up until the day that he retired. 45 years later, worked for General Motors. Gone overnight. And it was all those other components that in the supply chain that a number of small manufacturers contributed not just towards motor vehicle making here in Australia, but into other parts and other sectors around the economy that they fed into. So we had this knock-on effect. And as I said, there were around 200,000 jobs that, as a result of the closure of the industry, that simply went overnight. And that was worth around $29 billion to the Australian economy back then. But it is important to remind everyone, and I know there are people here in the gallery and those that are watching, about the Liberal Party's legacy when it comes to manufacturing, particularly in the automotive sector. Because when we want to also look at where do we see ourselves into the future, it is important that there are greater investments, whether it be in hydrogen, whether it be in electric, whether it be in hybrid-style vehicles. All of these are part of the market that we now live in. The automotive industry is one that's very dynamic at the moment and is actually interested in looking at new technologies, looking at ways of reducing the cost of new vehicles in this country to ensure that we do have better standards. Who would object to having better standards in the future? It'd be the same debate that we would have had several decades ago around seatbelts. There would have been people who said, no, it is my right not to wear a seatbelt. But guess what? We now have standards that say that you have to wear a seatbelt because there are safety reasons. In the same way that we are trying to adopt better fuel standards that are currently being met around the world, but for some reason there are people here in this country, people here in this parliament, that still want to live back in the old ages here. They need to get a reality check and understand that to move forward as a nation, as an economy, we need to also adapt to what is actually happening around us outside of our own little bubble here. The rest of the world has already moved on. They are already using your premium petrol, what we call premium petrol number 95, as their standard. And as a result, car efficiencies, fuel efficiency, is actually helping to make a contribution towards lowering our emissions here in Australia. But I just wanted to make that very point and place that on the record, that when we look at how many jobs that have been lost in the car industry, it is those opposite that should be blamed, who are now have the audacity to come into this place and tell us that somehow we're getting it wrong by actually helping Australians access affordable, cleaner vehicles with greater standards in this country.